Hi, Jay. Thanks so much for joining me, friend.
Hey man, good to see you.
So you have just launched a book on technology and mindfulness, and I imagine that's a lot of what we'll talk about, but there's a fair bit of territory to cover, and I'm just excited to see you. I love hanging out with you and spending time with you, so thanks for making the time. Um, yeah, I'd love to start by asking you the question I ask everyone, which is to hear about your life story. And for me, this really provides a frame on the conversation of like, who is this person? Where are they coming from? And typically there's one or two or three things I'm really excited to ask about specifically and learn about. I really try to receive each person in this as kind of my teacher for an hour or two, where it's like, oh, what can I learn from this person? How can I receive wisdom or insight or knowledge? And knowing, making that personal connection, knowing who someone is, where they're coming from, what they've experienced, what challenges they face, what the ups and downs so far at this point in the life kind of frames all of that specifics within a larger context. And I think it's also just beautiful. People have such varied lives and crazy stories of what they've been through, and it's just always amazing to hear what someone has lived through. So I love to make space for that and just hear, who is this person? What have you been through, and what has your life contained so far? So with that, would love to hear anything you'd like to share. It's all fair game, short, long, uh, metaphorical, direct, chronological summary, bullet point, whatever you'd like to share about your life. That's what I'd love to hear.
Yeah, let's start at the beginning. I was born in Quebec, Canada. My parents are immigrants from rural India. So my family goes back in Bihar, which is the poorest state of India. A lot of corruption. It's also where the Buddha was enlightened. It's just kind of half a day drive south of Mount Everest, sort of that corner of India. And so we were sort of like an immigrant family in Canada. My dad was like a voracious entrepreneur trying to really make it happen in finance. At a very young age, like before I could even remember, my mom was diagnosed with like a major mental health condition. And so that very much defined my early childhood where, my mom was going through a lot and was not always present. My dad was busy trying to provide for us and trying to chase his ambition. And like many immigrant parents and boomer parents, was very much just like driving for excellence in his kids. I have an older brother as well. So my brother and I kind of like we had a bit of rivalry, but we also were like best buds playing video games together and kind of escaping into virtual and digital worlds. Like we both like remember we probably have hundreds of memories of different video games we played together or arguing. Like once I slammed his arm in a door because he wouldn't let me on the computer. Like, just we were just, two boys try to get as much computer time as possible, which kind of feels like all kids now. We were like before it was cool, we were fighting over screen time. But part of that was also, really loved coding and trying to figure out how to work the computer and like use those DOS prompts. And then you get into high school, you start to come into the world, and a couple of things happen. So, because of the unique nature of that childhood, and like, as an adult, I've kind of reflected on like how hard it was for me to like get presence with my mother. Uh, I think it started this path of me like really just wanting attention and not being able to get it at home. And so that really defined my high school and well beyond even to this day, where I used to have a negative relationship with it and now I have a positive relationship with it. But like, I generally feel like a huge, my love language is quality time, right? Like, I just want that connection, that deep connection. And so my sort of life story is littered with attempts to do that from trying to be the cool kid in school and make a lot of friends to getting in drunken brawls to get everyone to pay attention to me and my friends and like, performing music to like starting a career and really appreciating areas of that career where I could be visible and so on. And it was around in my 20s. I'm almost doing the chronological decade by decade thing. It was like around in my 20s where I started to like not get the default attention that kids get, like from teachers or from like your peers at school and things like that. And I started to feel really meaningless. A lot of people come to meditation, which is what I found in my 20s. from a place of this like esoteric Eastern practice, and you're struggling with anxiety or depression, and you find this. It was different for me. I mean, it wasn't an esoteric practice. It was something as part of my family heritage. Parents were into yoga and meditation, but also instead of like anxiety, pain, suffering, it was like numb meaninglessness that was kind of my suffering that I was really feeling. And yeah, started to practice meditation, kind of felt it a little bit in music, started to go on retreats, started to explore deeper. And then that led me to a moment where I tried to combine my professional career as a designer with my personal practice of meditation. And that led me to where I am now, which is working at that intersection, both trying to design technologies for well-being, but also, as you read in the book, trying to think about how these meditative practices apply to technology. Because that little Jay who was so fascinated by computers is still in there, even though I want to be present and I want to be on a mountain and I want to be on a retreat. I still love technology, and it's like almost hurts me to see how warped it's become in our society. And but I know there's still glimmers of incredible technology out there. And yeah, so that's kind of that's the summary. That's where I've been.
Hmm,
Yeah.
love that. Thank you for so much for sharing. I'm curious what sense you have of how your parents' heritage from India and being an immigrant, the son of immigrants, how that impacted your childhood and your life. Like, if any strong memories come up or any, like, yeah, if you could give kind of texture to what that was like for you as a kid, especially, but also how it's impacted your life.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a lot of my childhood where I didn't even notice because it's all you know. But there were definitely glimmers of moments. Like I remember being like 15 or 16, and my mom had like a Bollywood magazine, like for like Hindi movies, right? And she loved Bollywood movies. She loves them still. But there was a picture of like a star on the cover, and he's there with his shirt off and he's looking all strong, but he had a hairy chest, which you just never saw. I've never seen that before. And I was 15. I was starting to get chest on my hair, and I felt like it was bad, right? Like I felt like it was unattractive. And I was like trying to wrestle with that. And I remember this like schism, like it was the beginning of a longer journey of being like, wait, I have a different body than all, like there was mostly white people at my school, right? I was just like, oh, I have like a different body type, and like starting to be realizing that. So there was definitely a thing of like me wanting to connect with like girls specifically romantically in high school, where I just felt like I wasn't in the same market. Like, like I wasn't, and that was really tricky. The other thing was, I think in retrospect, there are certain elements of like my parents pushing me to certain careers that come from an immigrant mentality, which I used to hate, but now I understand because where they grew up, you're never gonna get stability or even make it out of India or make it out of the village unless you have like a professional degree, which is like engineering or medicine. So people laugh about immigrant parents and how they always try to push their kids to be doctors and engineers. But now I get it. I'm like, they have never grown up in suburban Canada. They don't know that I can do cool things with a psychology degree. They're just like, the world is a crazy place. Nobody has any money. They've seen crazy shit in rural India, and they want the best for their kid. So they're like, if you be a doctor, you'll be safe. Like you'll, you know what I mean? And but they didn't have any context as to like growing up in Canada, and so I had to figure a lot of that out for myself. My brother and I both did, and so they had a lot of great wisdom in other ways, of course, but around that, there was definitely some differences. And then I think the other piece is the yoga and meditation, which like I rolled my eyes at as a kid, but I did see my father like meditate and do mantra meditation and explore that stuff from a very young age. I went to India a number of times as a child, and was exposed to a lot of these things that when I found yoga and meditation in that period of numbness and meaninglessness, there was a whole bunch of obstacles that many people face around like, whoa, why are we chanting in the morning? Is this a cult? That were just not there for me because I just grew up doing it. Like we went to temple all the time and chanted those exact mantras. So it not only wasn't an obstacle, but like I remember being on one of my first retreats and chanting. and just having full body flow, like meta flow in the chant. And I was imagining how strange it would be for my, then and now deceased grandparents to know that their kids like went halfway around the world and their grandkids were like raised in a completely foreign world, but somehow I found this mantra anyway. And I was doing something that was just reconnecting to thousands of years of my ancestors. Like I get chills even now just reflecting on it because it was like this amazing full circle of like, oh, the numbness and meaninglessness is because this element of my heritage has been removed from my life and now I'm finding it again. And so instead of an obstacle, the esoteric Eastern nature of these practices was like an incredible motivator for me to like reclaim my heritage in a way.
You have been exposed to a whole swath of different traditions and practices and views about spirituality. And I wonder, on this day that I find you, how you view spirituality and meditation practice and things like that. Like, what sense do you make of it? How do you relate to it? Um, how do you understand it at this time?
I think in on this day, in this minute, um, I I've stopped trying to make sense of it. I think that's really what I've kind of done. And if I had to put one concept, because that's a shitty podcast answer, but
I love it for the record. I'm like, oh, that's goals. I'm still trying to make sense of it over here. So thank you
yeah,
for
yeah,
pulling
yeah.
away.
I've stopped trying to make sense of it, but I do really like you're right, I have tried a lot. Like I've wandered into a lot of different traditions. And I think in terms of concepts, the way Zen practitioners speak of like conceptual mind and non-conceptual awareness really speaks to me as the essence of it. It's really the more I ground in kind of recognizing the emptiness of all these concepts and kind of ground in sort of natural awareness or true awareness or whatever you want to call it, nothingness, emptiness, whatever. But the more I ground in that non-conceptual, I actually like defining it by the negative. Like, I don't know what it is, but it's not conceptual. That's what I know. The more I ground into that, incredible benefits arise from my own benefits of, relaxation and insights and wisdom and skillful means in my daily life, but also this like unbounded love and compassion for others. And I have a 6-year-old who is challenging. He's very bright and he's very challenging, and it's just neurodivergent. The term that people use, I think, that resonates the most for me is twice exceptional. I'm not sure if you've heard that term before, but it's really fascinating. But you
Can you say
know,
what that term means?
yeah, so twice exceptional refers, another way you can think of it is like a spiky profile. So someone who's just like extreme strengths and extreme challenges. So the way I might describe, like if I was like passing Oliver, my son Ollie, to you to take care of him for a few hours, the way I might say that on my way out the door really quickly is like in some ways he's older than he is, and in other ways he's younger. Specifically, like if you want to engage his mind, don't think of him as 6-year-old, think of him as an 8 or 9-year-old. Like ask him deep riddles and questions and give him math problems and stuff, and he'll be engaged. But when it comes to social behavior and self-regulation, treat him more like a 4-year-old. And the twice exceptionality of that is referring to the challenges that a child like this has in the school system, for example, or systems of society where there's two exceptions. In some ways, they're like bored in lessons because they're way ahead of them, but then also they're struggling at recess because they don't know how to socialize with their peers. And so, very challenging. I bring it up because what's alive for me now, especially like we've had a rough week with him this week, and what's alive for me now is how tapping into this non-conceptual awareness, like it allows me to stay connected with my love for him despite how frustrating his behavior can be in the moment, right? And like I don't know what is spirituality if not that, because it's true of my relationship with other people and adults, my wife and you and everyone, where like the more I can ground in whatever is not conceptual, the more the love seems to flow, right?
Mm. Can you give me a really vivid description of what connecting to that non-conceptual awareness is like for you and the benefits that you've experienced?
Yeah. Mm. It just kind of happened now. um, I kind of just like decided not to try to like roll with that question and really, it's a deep question. So like tap into it. And my eyes wandered this way, and there's like a kind of fractal doorknob, glass doorknob there, and I saw the light flickering. And in my peripheral vision, I saw cars driving out the window and the snow, and I just had this moment of full HD presence. And if we rewind the tape back, you'll probably see my shoulders relax, and I can hear my speech is slowing down. My attempts to make sense are kind of I'm letting go of those. And I'm feeling like warm energy in my heart of just being like, oh, it's Tasshin. Like we're here, we're hanging out. And like that shift is what it feels like to me. And it's difficult to point to an example other than right now.
Mm, mm, beautiful. Mm, mm. Can you give me a history of how you related to this pattern around wanting attention from others? You said, you used to have a negative relationship with it, and now you have a sort of a positive relationship with it. I'd be curious to hear what that was like and how you noticed it and how your relationship with it changed over time.
Music is a great lens to trace this question. So I'm going to talk about it in terms of music, but I'll say up front that every stage of what I'm about to say was happening in all areas of my life. So
Mm,
curiously find a guitar interesting as a teenager, start to noodle around with it. It's sort of like kind of pure, but then I start to get attention for it. So from my family to like playing with some friends to going on my first open mic. And I have such a need for that whatever beauty of beginner's mind that I'd first found with the guitar gets replaced with craving for more attention around it. So then the songs I choose to learn and the way I choose to express myself starts to orient itself around how do I get people to pay attention to this and to make me feel special and to make me treat myself as special. My wife and I like to joke around with the idea of like a secret genius. Like, how do I get everyone to see that I'm secretly a guitar genius? And they didn't know that. And now they have to pay attention to me. So then I start putting together projects, like writing songs, putting together bands, trying to record things, trying to book shows. That escalates to touring, putting a band together. We're touring around Montreal and Ontario and upstate New York and just playing shows, psychedelic rock vibes, probably drinking too much, and just, it's not really only great music that calls attention. Like if I'm too drunk on stage, that calls a ton of attention, right? If I am physical, like there was one show where I just, pushed a mic stand into someone in the crowd and like reveled in the chaos that ensued. And like, it's just messy. We love the attention. We decide to put together an album, and there's secretly a hope that like some magic record label exec is going to come make us rock stars or something. Like we're sold the story that, the modern version of it's like be an influencer and have a million followers or whatever it is. But like, oh, music is going to, everyone's going to love me for this music. Of course, we put the album out. That's not how it happens. Heartbroken, devastation, fights in the band breaks up, meaninglessness, several years of not even really being able to play the guitar because it makes me feel so bad. It makes me feel like a failure. It makes me feel like it's pointless to even play because no one's paying attention to me. And it just reminds me that no one's paying attention to me and that I'm alone in this craft, that I'm not special and that I'm not, great at whatever it is that people want me to be great at. And then after years, letting those wounds kind of processing those wounds, doing the practice, trying to become aware of that feeling of playing the guitar again, and then learning to play with a capital P again. Like this is just about play. This isn't about attention. As I heal in other areas of life and heal in my meditation practice, I find myself being able to enjoy the sound. And then I go through a period where on one day I pick up the guitar and it's that emptiness again and that darkness. Another day I pick up the guitar and it's fun, it's light and it's play. It gives me direction. Oh, letting go of this craving for attention. I can give myself that love, right? Start to play, start to explore, set up instruments, not to be a studio and a production facility to create some project, but just to play. It's a playground, not a studio. And then now I'm in this phase where I'm like making music out of joy, starting actually to flirt with sharing it with people again, but not feeling that intense craving for attention, but also not denying myself the desire for connection. And so instead of this transactional craving of attention, deep connection from one person is enough to satiate because there's enough love in that. In fact, more love in that than some number on a screen that says 1,000 views than just like one person's direct attention and love, right? And so that's where I'm at now. I don't have it all figured out, but the book is part of that. Like the book has been a boss battle for me to put that out and invest all this time and create something. And it's a roller coaster. It came out a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still feeling, oh, does anyone like it? Or do people, to other days where I'm feeling like I'm still working on that. But now I see it. And so none of the suffering is that sharp because that awareness is there of like, oh, these are the ups and downs of the pattern of what this J mind body spirit thing is. And I'm here for the ride now, and I'm gonna savor the downs as much as the highs, and I'm gonna let this grow me. And so that's been kind of the relationship, and I don't know where it goes from here, but that's where I'm at now.
I loved the story in the book about after the band broke up that you had like one day that you played together and it was just for the music and you like were all like kind of in the groove and just really enjoying it together. That was such a beautiful story and I'm glad that you wrote that one down.
Yeah, that was maybe a sign of things to come. I wasn't there yet, but in that day, we were there for like a few hours. And
Oh,
I was like, whoa. And in many ways, actually, that moment was like a sign of things to come. It was a pivotal moment. I'm glad you connected with that.
are you still connected to the people that you were in a band with?
Yes, yes, I am. Probably the best thing to come from it was
Mm,
those five guys are lifelong friends, like kind
mm,
of band of brothers situation. One of them is my actual brother, so that's
mm.
obvious. But the other three guys, I have a different relationship with each of them, but yeah, we've got that shared background, and they all like, we don't necessarily have heart to heart conversations that often, but I just see what they're doing in the world, and I know in my heart that that year and a half, 2 years that we spent together figuring all that out was like pivotal for all of us. It was
Mm,
absolutely, that's the irony, actually. You're pointing at something really cool, which is by invoking those people who, those brothers, the irony is that when we all left school and all that kind of stuff to do this, everyone looked at us like, you'll never make it. It's a waste of time. Like, go back to school, like, get a real job kind of thing, right? In our lives. And then they were kind of proven right in a way because everything exploded, right? But the thing that those voices were missing was that was a crucible for lifelong relationships, not just with those guys, but with a couple of other people around the Band-Aids as well that I have like lifelong relationships with. But also, um, you know, we actually all learned that it's about more than, like that was still one of the best years of my life, despite it being a failure on paper. And so, some lessons to be learned there. So when I look at those guys, I think, yeah, they clearly all got that message too, just by the way they're operating their lives right now.
mm, mm. What's your sense of what you learned collectively from that experience? Like you talked about, your own relationship with attention and with music, but what if you zoom out to the group as a whole, like what do you think each of you learned from that experience?
Agency. I think in each of our own way, we had a lot of expectations on us from society and family. And that was something we did for us, And I think for a lot of us, it was the first time we were like, oh, like we can run counter to the societal script of what our lives should be and what our parents want us to do and what this school wants us to do. And we can say, listen, we want to do this thing and we're going to do it. And Whatever happened with that thing, all five of these guys are like living that truth. They're like none of them are stuck in decisions they're scared to make. You know what I mean? It's a weird sentence, but like I think you know what I mean. Like you could spend 20 years wrestling with the decision because you're too scared to make it. And I think we just learned that, yeah, oh, you have some agency in this world. And it takes a little bit of bravery and stupidity to exercise that agency, but it's the best kind of stupidity.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Like
Do you like?
stupidity as a counter to going back to the practice, conceptual, right?
Hmm.
Like if you operate only in a conceptual frame, then decisions that come from the non-conceptual can appear stupid. That's what I mean.
Hmm. Totally. Totally. I made a lot of those decisions.
I think I know that about you.
Yeah, I'm glad I did.
Yeah,
Uh,
no regrets.
do you like the music that you made? Do you ever listen to it?
Oh my gosh. That was a telepathic question, my
Yeah.
friend.
Oh.
Okay, so the book came out 2 years ago or 2 weeks ago, and I had a session with someone. Her name's Kelly Wild Miller. I don't know if you know her.
Mm-hmm.
She's on X and stuff. She's her whole thing is creativity, and she just reached out from a wavelength, and was just like, "Hey, I know you're putting this thing out. Be happy to get on a call with you and just talk through that process." And like that was needed more than she even knew because of what I said before. This is like a healing journey from all we've talked about, right? And one of the things she introduced was the idea, because I was talking about how the launch day is actually going to be a kind of anticlimactic and hollow. And I was bracing myself for that being a very challenging day. Like most people are like, oh, are you celebrating the launch? Like all the messages I got were like, congratulations. But I'm like, this is actually going to be a really challenging day for me because I have an insatiable need for that connection and attention. And a day like that, it feels like it's like you just want everyone to say happy birthday to you or whatever, right? And it's like,
Mm.
easy. Like you're like a little 5-year-old wanting everyone to celebrate your birthday and just
Mm.
everything should be about you, right? And so I was like, I know I'm not going to get into that trap again, but I don't know what's going to happen instead or whatever. And she pointed me to ceremony and she was like, you should bring ceremony into that. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea, especially with all this like monastic practice and stuff. Like I know a thing or two about ceremony. So I woke up, I did some meditation, I lit a candle, I did some ceremony. And then as part of the ceremony, I went for a walk out here in the snow and I popped in my headphones and I listened to the very first recordings that band ever did. And I can tell you for the first time ever, I listened to it without hating myself in a way. Like I listened to it like feeling proud of younger Jay and those other four guys. And I remember like not just listening to my own parts and like listening to the whole song and just being like, whoa, Neil was a sick drummer. And like, whoa, I remember this one part in the album where I remembered, my friend Kent and I getting in an argument about something. And I won the argument. Actually, like we ended up not including a part of a song that he really wanted to include. And I remember I was on this walk and I just felt sorry. I was like, we should have included your part. Like, I don't know what 21-year-old Jay was so on about, right? Like, you know what I mean? But it was like such a cool idea. And like, I generally just like heard it with like feeling proud of these young guys that were just trying to do something and it didn't matter what happened or where it went or whether anyone's heard it or anything like that. And it was really just a beautiful experience. So if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have said, no, I can't even listen to it. But that changed very recently. So a very telepathic question.
Mm. That non-conceptual awareness, though. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, it's magic.
uh-huh. Um, do you ever make music with those guys?
One of them, we share videos back and forth a little bit. Um, the other three, no. I would love
Mm.
to though.
Mm.
A while ago, my brother said something about like one day we should just like rent a cabin for a month and like bring all our instruments and just see what happens. Which I would love to do one day. But now, I think we're all dads now. Yeah. So that's harder to do.
Bring the kids.
Yeah, that's
Make
it.
music
That's
with the
it.
kids.
That's it. That'll be what'll happen probably.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Huh. Huh. Hmm. Tell me about the book and how the book came about.
Yeah. Um, 2015, 2016, still tech's honeymoon period. Everyone's just like, tech is great. I'm close to tech and close to mindfulness. So I saw the storm before it hit of, oh, this is distracting us and demolishing mental health. And just, it's a challenge, right? Like there's a lot of potential challenges with this tech, privacy issues, polarization. I remember writing about the filter bubble in like 2015. Like Eli Pariser wrote this book about the filter bubble and just being like, oh, these are problems. It was around the time when Facebook was starting to break democracy, basically,
Hmm.
right? And so, but most people were still kind of in a honeymoon period. I started writing about it. I got a little bit of engagement and dialogue around the attention economy and mindfulness as a antidote, as a vital skill set for the 21st century in a growing attention economy. Like, what practice more important in a world that's constantly trying to harvest your attention and distract you than a practice that's all about reclaiming your mind, right? Reclaiming attention. But then mixed feelings as the world caught up to that idea. Like, because I was excited that, okay, people were starting to realize and maybe we can do something about this. And Tristan Harris is there, at the Center for Humane Tech, and there's that Netflix documentary and other books released. Excited to see the message, but selfishly being like, why didn't I write about this more? Why didn't I, the self um, spiral? Um, and I started to be like, well, okay, I'll just write. I'll share my voice and do what I can to help this movement and support. But then it was around, I want to say, 2021 where, and now it's no longer the honeymoon period. People are a little bit like, tech is great and awful. Like it's love hate, confusion abound. I saw that specifically equanimity around the mindfulness path was missing from the conversation. That in fact, the tech conversation itself was becoming polarized. And that's when I decided I should actually write the book because I think as a mindfulness practitioner who loves video games, I was in a unique position to be like, I like to be on social media and I like to play video games and I work on a computer and I run a remote business. Like, I'm an entrepreneur and yet I also like to go on silent retreats and meditate. So I do have a unique vantage point here. There are many teachers wiser than me. There's many technologists who know more about technology than me, but I've been trying to juggle these extremes in my own life and I've learned a few things. And the conversation was becoming more either AI is going to solve all our problems and we're going to accelerate to the singularity, or all my mindfulness people were like, tech is bad and you should stay away from it. And I was like, okay, I might be the person who has to thread this needle. And so that's when I started kind of writing the book in earnest. And yeah, and I'm proud of it now. I'm proud of that was a hard needle to thread. It was very easy in early drafts to fall into either of those traps. But I'm feeling good about a balanced perspective that I think we do need in the future, as opposed to just giving ourselves fully over to technology or trying to resist it when it's part of our nature.
Hmm.
That's been the journey, kind of.
Yeah, it did seem like that was sort of the thesis of the book of like, hey, you know that middle way thing? Well, you can do that with technology too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
hmm. I think in retrospect, actually, I was probably a little afraid to read the book because I think I was afraid that you would go on the like tech is bad spectrum. Whereas I don't know, if anything, I err on the techno optimist side, which is unusual for the meditation type. So, yeah, I really appreciated how balanced a perspective it was of like, yeah, there are these traps or problems you should look out for, and here are some ways to navigate that aren't just like, yeah, at one point you're like, yeah, don't just get a dumb phone. That's dumb. You say, well, I don't think you put it that bluntly, but that was kind of the
Yeah.
vibe. And I was like, I don't know. I at least am always like rolling my eyes when people suggest
Yeah.
that as the solution. So, uh,
Yeah, me too. I think the reality is it's like, and I had this in the book too, which is like our version, our generation, our time this is our version of discovery, right? Like our ancestors were very used to discovery because they knew nothing and they would travel to a new island and they had no idea what it was and where it was. And there would be animals they didn't recognize and they would have to learn a new way of being. And, at this point, we've circumnavigated the globe. We still have to figure out what's going on in our oceans and, heal the planet. And there's much to be discovered in that way. But one of the versions of our discovery is this new way of being, kind of going inward into our conceptual minds. And like all this technology is extending our conceptual minds into this like vast interconnected web of concepts about concepts about concepts about concepts. And yeah, we'd be foolish to imagine that we're not going to have to do the work to figure out how to exist in a new time with new technology. And the answer is not to hide away from it, though some people can do that, and that's a way of living. And yeah, I don't think the answer is to just like not even question it and just go fully into it. I think what most people need to do is find ways and strategies to approach those problematic traps and habit loops we can get stuck in when they're not serving us, but also not forget to like fully enjoy the parts that are serving us, right? That there are many things about technology that we love. And when we lose the joy, we're kind of losing the plot, right? Like we've got to
Mm,
stay in track with the joy of technology as well. Another way to say this is like, it's a shame that our peers in the mindfulness space are typically kind of veering on the anti-tech side because especially with the dawn of AI and LLMs and all this, I can't imagine a group of people that we more need engaged with technology. It's a whole attention system. It's a extension of collective mind. We need our wisest people to help guide the future of technology. We don't need them to be like, I don't know, wearing white robes and digital detox retreats. We need them like steering our tech companies.
right.
So I don't know how we get there, but I think those of us, you're like yourself included, that kind of love both and see the value of both are like, I think going to be essential. Um, you know, that harmony is going to need to be essential in the rest of this century, especially when I think about Gen Z or my son, who's like, I guess Gen Alpha or whatever's after that. They're going to need to be finding harmony between spirituality and mindfulness and well-being as well with technology and AI and, being extremely connected.
Mm.
Yeah.
You said that in the process of writing the book, it was easy to kind of veer onto one side or the other. What was that like? Like, what were the points where you found yourself veering one way or the other?
It's sort of like parts work, right? Like I could
Mm,
feel the part of me that was like frustrated with all this tech kind of destroying my mental state. And that part would want to write paragraphs that were a little more aggressive about
mm,
the problems. And then the part of me that like the little 5-year-old who loved coding and learning DOS and stuff like that and just loves video games would be the one that was just like a little too like, you know, um, giving it the benefit of the doubt when in fact there are some real problems.
mm,
And so if we use the language of parts work, the like self who's like overseeing all these parts was able to like the writing process was very much like let's sit down, let's stop, let's have a think, let's be in dialogue with each other and compromise between those extremes to find that middle way.
mm, mm. What did you learn through the writing process, or how do you feel like you grew either as a writer or a thinker, as a person through creating this book?
The first published writing I did was academic. So I have like, I don't know, 10 or 11 academic publications. And they teach you to write a certain way in academia, and it's not very readable. Like it's
Mm,
very tons of citations, tons of statistics and systematic approaches. And so I've been trying to unlearn those habits a little bit. And what I did with this book, I was talking to some mentors and exploring what I wanted to do. And I didn't realize the power of this when I said it, but it ended up being really powerful, which was the very beginning. I said, the first draft of this manuscript, I don't want there to be any statistics or citations at all. I just want to like write the story and then I can kind of come back and revisit those elements because I was fundamentally like, when someone says like, first of all, you can get the stats anywhere, but like when someone says, 22% of people are dealing with blah, 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 it doesn't really persuade me about anything. Like it just doesn't. And I was really inspired by kind of nonfiction books that actually are applicable in my life. Like I think at the time of writing, I had just read 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman, which is a great book. And I was really inspired by it, as along with other books in this category, where just like I wasn't even done the book yet, and there were changes in my life that were already starting to happen. And I was pretty convinced that like a bunch of academic citations or book citations or research citations or statistics were not going to do that. And what that did is by the time I was halfway through the first draft of the manuscript, I was having a bit of an existential crisis that I eventually realized was that I felt like naked, not being able to appeal to a higher power. Like I wasn't citing any Sanskrit words about Buddhism. I wasn't citing any Western philosophers. I wasn't citing any modern science papers or statistics. It was just me and a page and my experience. And that like kind of like dark night of like, oh my, like this is garbage. This writing is awful. Like, why would anyone listen to me? Out of the ashes of that came like a newfound self-worth of like, I can step into my own voice. Actually, sure, this may be not going to be like the world-changing book, but there is some value to my perspective. And as I stepped into that more and more, not only did I find a flow in writing and eventually in editing, brought a few citations in and brought some science in and like did it tastefully, but I also found it like outside of the realm of the book, more recognition and confidence to do something like what we're doing right now. Whereas this might have really stressed me out before because there would be this little part of me that's like, who's going to listen to this? Why does anyone care what I have to say? Was sort of being like, no, I care a lot what other people have to say, and I have some experiences and I'll share them, and may they be of benefit. And if they're not, then people will move on, and it's not like a big deal, right? And that was like a surprisingly mundane thing to take like half my life to figure out. But the book was a real catalyst for it. It was a bit of a boss battle in that self-worth category, right?
What are some things that you're proud of about the book?
Hmm. I'm proud of the writing style, specifically because it's readable.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that you'd done a bunch of academic writing and that you don't fall back on those. Great.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Like now that you know that context, you can understand why that's, it's not like, oh, I just happen to be a good writer. It's like I've unlearned a bunch of school habits around writing and learned how to be a person in words again. And it's really fun. It's really
Definitely a
great.
person. It's great. I was hanging out with my friend Jay for a few hours. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the middle way, which was hard fought and hard won. And I think the deepest thing that I get is when people who've read the book tell me about direct benefits in their life. And, going back to that thing around wanting attention for myself, I think the integration is that a younger me was insecure and wanting any form of love he could get because he was sort of starved from it a little bit. And I think an middle-aged midlife crisis, Jay, is like understanding that love comes from service. And I'm proud that I do feel good, obviously, when people buy the book and say they bought it or review it or like talk about it, obviously. And I don't want to diminish that because it's okay to feel good. It's okay to celebrate oneself as long as you're not worshiping oneself. That being said, I'm proud that I'm getting as much, if not more, joy out of being of service and benefit to others. And a great example of this is like the Friday after the book came out. Book came out on a Tuesday. It was a pretty great week. Um, the Friday night, I had a bit of a hangover where I felt that little Jay craving more attention. Like, did I do enough? Did I get enough out of this? Blah, 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 blah. And, um, you know, as I reintegrated that over the weekend and came back on Monday, there was this feeling of enoughness that was just not requiring any kind of extrinsic external appearance, like something happened and now the book's enough, because that's not ever going to happen. But it was actually more of a feeling of like grounding in the voices I'd already heard of people whose lives have gotten better. And just like I did this sort of reflection on just like the physical materiality of the book being in homes of people I care about and being in homes of people I don't know. And some of these ideas, like maybe being applied and hearing stories about people applying them to their own relationship with technology and feeling a little better about it and seeing a little clarity. And that's what healed me this time, not someone giving me another expression of love, which will just satisfy me for another day. And then I'll need more and more. But it was actually something deeper and more in a mindset of service. I'm still working on that, but I'm proud of at least as far as I've come on that because that's been a hard journey for me.
Hmm. Hmm. Love that so much. And I really relate to it in my own experience of, yeah, sort of short-term praise versus like really knowing that you've benefited someone or had an impact and service being a motivator. Um, you mentioned a number of strategies in the book for how to relate to technology through this kind of middle way. And yeah, I imagine those were also kind of hard earned of because there is a lot of implicit advice to just dive in and go hog wild, and then there's also a lot of sort of puritanical, like just avoid it or cut it out or whatever. And I wonder mm, which of those strategies that you share have been most personally useful for you, and also kind of what things you're hearing early on from other people about what's already impacted them.
Yeah, the one that I've seen a lot of positive resonance around and has been incredibly useful for me, but I wouldn't have predicted this necessarily as the one that others were immediately connecting with. There's an exercise in the book about directly addressing the emotional need underlying problematic tech use, which basically is all about, if you're using a lot of TikTok, right? Let's just take that as an example. It's a very common example, right? The puritanical way, I think we know, is like TikTok is bad. The algorithm's designed to fuck with you. You should put it away. TikTok, you should delete it. Never go on TikTok. It's bad, right? That's like the puritanical view. And then the, accelerationist view is just like, this is just way life is becoming. Like, just use TikTok as much as you want. It's incredible creations on there. And these people, these people are judging who cares about the real world. This is a real world too. Let's enjoy it. Let's go online or whatever. And there's merit to both perspectives, but one access point, one strategy to get to the middle way is to look at what I would work with someone on this. What I would say is, well, let's look at your use and let's explore like why you're using TikTok. Like, what is the deeper emotional need that is driving this behavior? What is there any uncomfortable feeling you're trying to avoid with TikTok? For example, is it because you're lonely and you're looking for connection and TikTok makes you feel like you're connected? Or is it that you're bored in these moments and TikTok is stimulating? And in some cases, in many cases, those problematic loops are coming from a deeper emotional need that doesn't have a better outlet, doesn't have a more lasting or a deeper solution. Like if you're lonely, the illusion that TikTok will give you is only going to go so far to meet your deeper need for connection. And what we often see is that if you find some and brainstorm some other ways to meet that emotional need, like you need more fun in your life, you need more play, you need more connection, you need more stimulation, or you need to be more comfortable being not stimulated, or whatever it might be. Not only is that a great cue for you to like deepen your own well-being and your own relationship to your mind, but when you actually do that work in a more lasting way, you find that you can start to use TikTok in a kind of more balanced way. Like you don't have to get TikTok out of your life. You don't find yourself using it for 3 hours. You use it for 10, 20 minutes and then you move on without that like insatiable need because the deeper emotional, like healthy motivational need that might have been expressing itself in an unhealthy way has been satisfied in a more lasting and meaningful way. So that exercise, and I've been guiding it as a meditation a little bit too, as kind of like a journaling exercise as well. And that, I've gotten tons of people reach out and respond saying that, like, giving me examples of technologies that they've immediately kind of healed their relationship with through that exercise. And that's exactly what happened that following Monday, where I was like getting that kind of feedback. And I was like, that makes it all feel so worth it that like that thing can help.
Yeah, that was one of the strategies that really struck me too personally. I think made me curious about some. relationships that I had with different aspects of technology and like yeah, what emotions are underneath it and mm, yeah, I think one of the things I really liked about that also was that it was not prescribing certain behavioral adjustments prematurely, where it was just like, hey, get curious and investigate what are you feeling and what are the needs here and look at that and feel that. And as you said, that kind of automatically might shift how you orient towards those things without kind of prescribing it in a top-down, heavy-handed way ahead of time of like, oh, just cut this out or go all in or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I learned with years of experimenting with this is that those tips and tricks are like everywhere. Like,
Mm.
delete app, cancel your notifications, get the phone out of your bedroom, whatever it might be, delete certain apps, right? The problem with those is they're not grounded in self-awareness of your unique situation and they fundamentally demonize a certain technology. Like I like getting notifications from my wife because we co-parent and I want to know exactly what's happening with my son. I enable notifications for my babysitter when we're out because I want to know what's like notifications are important sometimes. The question is like with self-awareness, you have to sort of craft your own relationship, which is sometimes not as easy as a tip or trick. Don't get me wrong. Like if you're really drowning and you don't know, like you can just try a bunch of these and see what sticks to the wall. But with self-awareness, like you can actually recognize that for someone, TikTok might be great, and for someone else, it might not be great. And it might be actually kind of a band-aid to something much, much deeper. And in order to kind of find that balance, we don't have to demonize TikTok, and we also don't have to get confused by the fact that like everyone in the world seems to be on TikTok, but I can't form a healthy relationship with it. What's wrong with me? And feel broken. Instead, it's like, oh, we each have our own minds with our own patterns that make some technologies like really joyful and engaging for us, some neutral, and some fundamentally problematic. Like video games are a great example of this. Like you can just look at a catalog of video games, and there's some that I'm a gamer. I love video games. I grew up playing video games. There's some that I just can't play, not because I don't like them, because I've just played video games for so long that I know they will destroy my life.
Mm.
Just like this game looks so cool and it has certain elements to the design and the pattern that like I'm glad that people are loving it. I just know my mind well enough that this has a high likelihood of just commanding all my attention for weeks.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
So, but then other games are fine and they're beautiful and I enjoy those ones, right?
Hmm. What you're saying makes me think that some of the um, patterns or behaviors or habits that I've found for myself in relating to technology aren't ones that I've ever heard anyone else say, or that I don't know, I would even have a hard time articulating them off the top of my head because I've just kind of learned them through years of practice and relationship, and they are very custom to just me. And yeah, I like that you say that people's different context or needs or patterns are going to be really different.
Yeah, we were having a conversation before and you took a second to just tweet something, right?
That's
And
right.
it was like, it's a beautiful thing because I know you and I know how you tweet and I know you like to get those moments. It's sort of a notepad and you share in a spontaneous, direct way. And that's what I enjoy about reading what you have to share. But there's so many spaces in this world that would judge you for that. They would be like, "Oh, you're
Hmm.
addicted to Twitter." I mean, listen to that
Uh-huh.
language. You're
Uh-huh.
addicted to, you know what I mean? Like it's just we
Yeah.
don't need that. Like the other one that I mentioned in the book is like binge watching. Like
Mm.
these language choices matter. Like that's just dripping with shame. TV is
Hmm.
amazing. I love watching TV. Sometimes I need to watch a few episodes. Sometimes I need to watch one. If I'm doing it mindlessly, I can work on that or whatever. But like, come on, like,
Mm.
we don't need to shame each other for loving TV shows while it's like the largest industry, one of the largest industries because
Mm.
everyone loves TV and movies and we're a storytelling species. Like, there are, I mean, let's put it bluntly. There are patterns we need to manage because they're not great for us. There are challenges in the way some of the ethics behind this technology is designed, right? There's a need for scientific experimentation of the impacts of this technology on our minds. Regulators potentially might need to get involved. I think it's maybe too early, but we have to consider that at least. But that doesn't mean we need to be shaming and guilting and fear mongering. It doesn't mean that we have no agency in our own lives for how we connect with this technology. I don't know when those ideas got connected with each other, but like all of that can be true. We can drop the fear game and fear, guilt, and shame. We can continue to investigate the scientific impacts. We can consider regulation if it's relevant. We can work on more ethical technologies, and we can find agency in our own lives. And like, I don't think we need to be polarizing this,
Hmm.
you know?
I love that so much. Yeah, I don't think fear and shame are ever really very helpful or only to a limited degree. And I appreciated that point in the book that you said that you didn't really like the word addiction or yeah, binge watching, and you suggested the word relationship instead, and um, have a thread about that. But just like, oh, if you do take the frame addiction, then I'm hopelessly addicted to these things. If you take that frame, but that just doesn't feel like either empowering or accurate. That's not how I experience that relationship. It's for me it's generative and life-giving and connective actually for people for me the way that I relate to these technologies, and addictive just feels so like such a limited perspective and kind of pigeonholing into something bad, and also just one metric. It's like, oh, how much you use it. It's like, yes, I do use these things a lot. That is true. That's a fact. But the life experience is much more um, generative and life-giving for me than just, oh, I know addiction is like, oh, you've got a needle in your arm and you're like pale and not
Right.
healthy and whatever. It's like that's not it.
And it's a spectrum, right? Because there are people who may let's take a hypothetical straw
Mm,
man who's just like you, uses
mm,
technology in this in as much as you do, but actually kind of is struggling. Like you're
mm,
not, but
mm,
they're like actually like I feel like I'm using this too much. I feel scattered. I feel fragmented. I feel lonely. And even that person I wouldn't consider addicted, right?
mm,
It's like at the point when there's a small subset of people that I would say fit the like clinical criteria for addiction, where their rampant use of technology is like literally destroying their lives the way heroin and cigarettes might. Cigarettes is an interesting example because it's not necessarily destroying you in the moment, but then as we did the science, where like it's actually destroying your lungs. And so there's a whole other kind of category of addiction. And so I don't know, I'm not an addiction scientist, like I don't know where the line is, but like certainly there's some category of people, a vast minority, who would fit the criteria of like actually using that word. And I think for the rest of us, it's the difference between like a toxic relationship versus like a codependent relationship, avoidant and anxious relationships, all the way to disorganized relationships. But then I think what we're shooting for is a secure relationship with technology. And the framing of relationship is a lot more empowering. And I think it's more accurate because there's a lot we love about technology, right? We're getting something from it. And so we need to set boundaries in a way that allows us to like enjoy our positive experiences with technology, but like we're setting boundaries in service of a better relationship, not just trying to get rid of it. We're not trying to like quit cold turkey. We're trying to find a way to like have a healthier and more secure relationship with technology. So I find that word a lot more practical for most of us, not everyone, but for most of us.
yeah, the connection to attachment theory is really a helpful one, I think, and um, clarifying. I'm reminded that I think one of the things that's helped me a lot, even as I do use technologies a lot, is kind of an axis of how participatory it is versus just consuming. And I mean, even consume, I don't know, maybe consuming has a bit of a shame vibe to it, but like how much are you just receiving information versus creating things or participating or engaging? And I think it's fine to receive information. There's a lot of really interesting stuff out there, but I think that if you only do that, it does tend towards like loneliness and overwhelm and these things. Whereas for me, spending a lot of time creating things, putting in things out there, sharing things, connecting to other people has been part of what it's made it more like life-giving and generative than just endlessly reading articles or endlessly watching YouTube videos or whatever it would be.
Yeah, when we think about technology as a relationship, then we can say that authentic, satisfying relationships are reciprocal.
Hmm.
And so whether it's someone like you who's very publicly posting, or whether it's a one-on-one chat where you're sending voice notes with someone, it is absolutely possible to have these like authentic reciprocal digital relationships, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, as far as the science shows that we know, you do need in-person reciprocal relationships too. Like your body evolved for that. But that doesn't mean that you can't have authentic relationships online. You certainly can.
Hmm.
But I think one of the challenges that a lot of people face around this is like the one-to-many nature of a lot of social media, right? Like where it's really easy to post something in on a kind of public forum and not get the feedback you want, right? Like I'm looking at your face right now. Sure, it's on a video call, but I see you nodding and I'm getting this like immediate social feedback that makes me feel connected.
Hmm.
And social media is almost the complete opposite. Like when you post, unless you have like a bajillion followers or whatever, like most likely you're not going to get any real feedback for a little while, if ever. And it can feel kind of really empty and hollow. And so wherever you go, like I've been recently, as you might know, I took some inspiration of your extreme onlineness.
Hmm.
And in the past few weeks around the book launch, decided to like step back into social media I've never really used personally, like Instagram and TikTok and things like that. And one of the things that I noticed was I realized why I gravitate to certain social media and not others. It's specifically that when I'm getting some sort of reciprocal feedback and relationship, even if it's not huge, that feels like enough. And so on X, Twitter, there's like a small group of people and we are sharing things and we all have a lot of common interests and it feels super fun, right? Like teapot vibes, right?
Hmm.
But and like even on LinkedIn, which is like everyone cringes about, I'm an entrepreneur and I have a mission to bring more mindfulness in the world through technology. And I find other people who share that mission on LinkedIn. So I have a great time on LinkedIn as well. But when I'm on certain social media and I don't get that reciprocal nature, it doesn't really hook me or connect me. And so I don't
Hmm.
really want to do it. But group chats are great, but they are also kind of one to many when they get too big, where you feel like you share something and then it's kind of everyone's talking about around you. And that can be really, really tough. One-on-one video messages are like incredible for authentic or audio voice notes. But one thing I wanted to point out is like as an interesting case study in this, have you tried any of these like one-to-many social media that are voice-based? Have you tried any of those?
Mm, I feel you. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few that I've tried, right? And they don't really take off.
Mm.
And one of the reasons I think, in my experience of it, is the one-to-many like empty room feedback becomes even more painful when you're using your voice. Like
Mm.
you literally feel like you're speaking into the void. Like when you make a post with your voice and no one engages with it, it hurts somehow like 10x more than when you make a tweet and no one
Mm.
engages with it, right? But in general, I think when you start to build a reciprocal in group and you start to get trust that there are people out there to connect with, social media becomes a kind of beautiful experience. And I think it doesn't have to be one to many, it can be one to one. But in any case, looking for those reciprocal relationships online can be very satisfying. And I think
Mm.
the more you crave more followers and more following and stuff, like the more you start to fall into the loop of just like, craving that and like take it from someone who's like spent his whole life craving attention. That's where I get this background where I'm like, oh, I see what's happening online. Like we're
Mm.
all craving a form of love called attention that it's hard, on systems that are never going to fill our hearts up completely.
Mm.
But you can still get a little decent connection with people, but you need a whole ecosystem to really kind of fill that heart. But as you know, with compassion practices and love practices, we can actually train our ability to like pull a lot of love out of the smallest little thing. And that's, again, we're going full circle back into non-conceptual awareness. There's something
Mm.
mysterious and magical besides all of that that is kind of underlying all of this. So that's where I'm still working, but learning a lot.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think that point about the reciprocal nature of it is really important. And I'm reminded that another big feature of why, for me, the way I relate to these online tools works so well is because, like in this example, right? You and I are on a Zoom call. It is a digital online interaction, but I've
Mhm.
known you since I forget what year, but like 2017 or 2018 or something, maybe
Yep.
2016. Like we've known each other for quite a while and we've met in person multiple times. Like
Yep.
we have a relationship that's, yeah, probably. 80% online, but like we've met in person multiple times and have, I've met your wife, I've met your son. Like it's um, has that added context of, oh, we've actually spent time together in person multiple times, and then when we do spend time in person, it's enriched by the time that we've connected online, and it's like, for me, that's a mutually supportive feedback loop. And I always am staying with people who I know in person, or who I've met through online, and then I get to know them better in person, and then those online interactions are enriched. So there's this whole dense network of people I know through both online interactions and in person. And if I don't know, if I just know them in one of the contexts, I'm always trying to know them in the other context. Like I love to meet people that I've never met before, and then yeah, I like to stay connected to my friends through these platforms as well. And that just makes it so much more vibrant and real for me that I've actually spent time with these people. And yeah, and then inverse thing, that like I get to see so much more context about someone's life if I read their posts or their newsletters or something, and then we have something really vibrant to talk about when we spend time together in person.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, and the way you're speaking about it, right? Like it's non, you're not prioritizing digital over real or real over digital, physical over digital or anything. It's just a relationship. And what you're prioritizing is authenticity and reciprocity.
Hmm.
And that's, I think there's a false dichotomy out there that like we need to be in person and we can't be digital. And it's like, yeah, we need both and we can do both. And the
Hmm.
point is, are you authentic? Are you reciprocal? And funnily enough, like hearing you say that reminds me, I think it was 2018 when we met.
Mm.
And it's like, I have that same experience of you of like kind of
Mm.
witnessing your journey a little bit at a distance and like connecting and just seeing, and that's just been a beautiful thing to witness and an inspiring journey,
Mm.
right? And we're in like very different lifestyles right now,
Mm.
which is another part that makes these digital tools so incredible, right? You're like nomadic. I'm doing the family thing. Like I'm
Uh-huh.
not, it's so hard for me to get anywhere. Like if you think about the past few times we've seen each other, you just took a whole mission to get there. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's like not just
Right.
me. I'm like trying to figure out either bringing my child or figuring out how to like make sure he's cared for so I can, go to vibe camp or whatever. And I think there's something about that too, which is like without these digital tools, it would be impossible for us until like you finally come up to Canada. It would
Hmm.
be impossible for us to maintain this level of connection that we're doing,
Hmm.
thanks to that. And one of the things that's coming out of this social media experiment that I've been doing, like trying these social media, is I've been toying with the idea of splitting up parts on different social media.
Mm.
I wonder if that's something you've thought of a little bit, but I started to play around with the different social media and exploring, and I was sort of like noticing that actually there are different identities and different parts of me that show up on different platforms. And I was thinking about making that more explicit and doing that more intentionally about like, part of me cringes over on LinkedIn. But then I'm also like, as I just mentioned, kind of coming to terms with like, oh, that's like a career part of me. And I love that part of me. He's got his own thing going on and he tries to be a certain way and he tries to play that game and subvert it in his own way. And like, oh, I want to celebrate that part of me. So like, I'm going to go all in on that part on LinkedIn. And then like on Twitter, I'm just like posting random shit. And I'm like, that part of me also, you know what I mean? Like, and one of the things that precipitated this was I was using a TikTok a lot and I realized that TikTok is more of a performance media than a social media.
Mm.
Like it's really about performance. All the metrics are like kind of like when you launch a website or a product, you're like, how long did people watch my video? And everyone's performing and creating content or whatever. And I was like, oh, I should put music up on TikTok, which is really edgy for me for reasons previously discussed. But I've been, starting to play around with putting a little music on TikTok. And I'm like, oh, trying to like bifurcate my identities to see if that authentic reciprocity is possible for different parts at a different, like each part has its own authentic reciprocal digital relationships in a way that I could never do in person. Like it's one thing to say, oh, well, technology is like, it's like in person, but worse. But it's another thing to be like, what can we do on social authentic relationships that we could never do in person? And
Mm.
one of the things is like bifurcate my parts completely.
Mm.
So that's kind
Hmm.
of my latest experiment I've been toying around with.
Mm. How has that been for you?
Well, I haven't done it yet. I'm thinking
Mm.
about it, but like
Uh-huh.
it certainly was it was amazing to realize. And the part like I just posted a video of myself playing music on TikTok just as an experiment, and it felt really good. It felt actually, you know what it made me want to do? It made me want to make an alt, right? It made me want to
Mm,
like think about the profiles and just like make a TikTok profile that has zero connection to my real identity for music.
mm.
And then, you know what I mean? Like it's still a work in progress, but I'm like experimenting with like subverting identity now. And I think that might be a fun next step for like digital life for me, like to just, let Jay Vidyarthi be on LinkedIn. And the rest of them can be just a total shit show, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's going to be fun.
Huh. I love that. Love that. Huh. Hmm. Hmm. So changing gears a little bit, I'd love to hear about your professional life and your work. And I don't know, I've had a chance a few times to kind of see from a distance how you've supported different companies and how you've shown up. And I feel like you have, from what I can tell, and we've sort of talked on this, but kind of a unique perspective on things like design or how to show up to a company or a startup or something like that. And I'm wondering if you could speak to, yeah, what perspective you bring to the work that you do and what kind of skills, and if you could tell me a bit about your work from that angle.
Yeah. So I apply the design process and like product design to technologies for mindfulness, compassion, and well-being. It's a whole story of how I got focused in this area, but we can just call it personal and professional integration. Like there was a time where I was working in design and exploring these practices on my own. And I was like adamant that I wanted to kind of bring those parts together and work on technology. Like a lot of the design projects I was working on were just pointless, help some company sell more, whatever, doodads, right? Versus can we use technology to help with more mindfulness and compassion in the world? And so fundamentally, like I can answer this question in a million ways, but like from a pure design perspective, the one thing that I kind of show up with is like a current and future vision for design. So the current vision is like I'm big on empathy for clarifying your target audience and including them in the design process. So if you're working on something, a new technological creation to promote love and compassion in the world, right? It's like, okay, well, who specifically are we targeting? And how do we go find those people and show them what we're working on and engage with them and observe them playing with our prototypes and use that to make it better, as opposed to the kind of like, I'm a secret genius. I know what people need. I'm going to figure it out, which increases the possibility for positive impact, but also the possibility for success because the graveyard is full of products that are not designed for anyone. Right.
Hmm.
So that's from like a design perspective. Now, specifically the fact that I focus on technologies for mindfulness, compassion, and well-being, it's like a million different insights that we've gathered over the years. But the high level ecosystem insight that I've pulled out is like if you think about the general Silicon Valley startup tech capitalism model, Amazon as a poster child, let's say, which is they figure out how to market things on a website. They figure out the logistics of shipping. For them, it doesn't matter what's in the box. You can buy a shirt, you can buy a pot, you can buy a book, video game, whatever. Put it in the box. They've solved it. One click ordering. Next thing you know, the box is at your door, right? I've been working on a lot of stuff that's about helping people feel okay, right? And it's a little different because people are so diverse. We have completely different childhoods and philosophical backgrounds. We have things we've tried, things we haven't tried. We have generational trauma. We have different, races and all kinds of background and elements to the way we approach the world and approach our mental health and our well-being. So the idea of an Amazon for spirituality and mental health doesn't really make sense because it's more like we're going to need an ecosystem of niche solutions for people at different types on different stages of the path in different ways. And so one of the challenges that the entire like spirit tech ecosystem is facing is that the traditional model of like build it, find a success and scale it just is not going to work given the human diversity of mental health and well-being. And so right now, I run a fractional product team that's like basically working with as many companies as possible in this space to level up and improve their impact. Because the current theory is we need an ecosystem. So I'm going to try to help as many great founders who have cool ideas solve the product design challenges and get to their impact and their audience as quickly as possible so that we can have an ecosystem. Now, that being said, the last thing I'll say on this is the other insight, which is often I'll be working with an organization and they'll be like, this is great. Do you want to come work full time? And my general mental model around how to make that decision is if I were to go full time with this organization, would my overall potential for positive impact on people's well-being be higher or lower? And right now, given like what I know about myself and this kind of ecosystem, I generally think like it's going to be lower because it'll be like one target audience and one solution that I don't necessarily believe will scale beyond that target audience. But what I'm actively looking for and talking with some people and trying to help figure out in the kind of like people in this sector is there a way that we can create a curation layer where not only is there an ecosystem, but there's a tool that can help navigate someone to the right part of the ecosystem based on who they are and what they're doing. And if I can figure that out, I'm all in to build that. But we're still kind of figuring it out, and there's a lot of challenges with how that might work and et cetera, et cetera. But that's, I mean, that's like maybe 5 minutes on my work and a view of
Mm,
this space. And yeah, happy to dig in more on any of that if you want. I'll
mm.
bring Jay Vidyarthi from LinkedIn and I'll put on a blazer
He's
and I'll be
great.
like, yeah.
I like all the J's. I'm a big fan of all the
Yeah.
J's, uh,
Me too.
including
He's all
LinkedIn
right. He's
J.
all right.
So, uh, um, can you say what fractional means here in this context?
Yeah. So fractional means like, I mean, I can say the basic pitch is like, let's say you decide to start a tech company, right? One of the challenges you're going to run into right away is like you've probably got bootstrap funding, low amounts of funding. Maybe you raised a seed round and you've got a little bit of cash. In order to launch a successful product, you need like top tier product design.
Mm,
In order to hire a top tier product design team, let's imagine a product lead, a UX researcher, and a designer, right? These are people like if they're at the top of their game, you're looking at like six-figure salaries for a whole year. So you're looking at like right away hiring, I don't know, five to $600,000 worth of people. And on top of that, you don't necessarily need them throughout the whole year. Like you just need to like kind of prop up a prototype, get it into your deck and go raise funds and like socialize it and build it. And like maybe a year later, you're going to bring in the kind of product resources to improve it. And so our basic pitch is like, we're like a think tank on these skills, but we just work a fraction of a time for many organizations when they hit that cycle of need. So that like as a founder, you could get top tier product design and research and leadership for a couple of months to run a couple of sprints, get your prototype ready to raise an investment round or to build a first version of the product or whatever. And then you just stop paying us for a while and we're here when you need us for the next cycle. And the way we make that work is we're doing it for multiple companies at the same time. So that keeps our calendar full throughout the year. So this is me and my team at Still Ape I'm talking about. And so fractional means like a fraction of our effort is on a bunch of like we have like five or six projects going on right now. Like so we're like divided among different projects.
I'm so glad I asked because that's such a good explanation of it. Thank you. Um,
Great.
what are the people you have on your crew and what are the different roles that they have? Like, how do they all fit together?
Yeah. So the crew is basically other than administrative, it's I'm sort of like the fractional product leader, and I have UX researchers and UI designers and creatives. So UX researchers are people who are great people skills, empathic, and have studied up how to like lead unmoderated qualitative research sessions. So these are the people that'll like, if we figure out who the target audience is for your love machine, we're going to recruit people from that audience and we're going to involve them. We're going to engage them. We're going to interview them. We're going to show them prototypes. We're going to use like UX methods and all kinds of different, diary studies we do sometimes where people like use it for weeks and report. And we're going to collect that data. We're going to analyze it and we're going to pull out insights about what we need to do to either make the product better or to pivot completely and to be better service and fit into their lives. Now, the prototypes those researchers are showing are created by the design side, where we're actually like taking a vision of a product, putting together the screens, architecting the user experience, how the screens fit together, how things are organized. We work on content sometimes too, working on like meditations and like different things like that. So, in harmony, under my leadership, those two sides of the organization work together to run these, sprints of like, let's say a month where we do discovery, we gather all the context we need, and then we like ideate and design and work with, get a lot of feedback and be like, okay, this is the kind of thing we want to make. Like these are examples, just like sketching and figuring out designs. Then we bring those designs to look like an actual like app or a hardware product or a packaging or whatever it is we're working on. Then we go and we do the research to figure out how people are resonating and using and experiencing that. Then we iterate, we go back and we improve things based on that and we continue those cycles. And then we use that to structure kind of a roadmap of what needs to be built. So if you think of developers, like software developers, as like a construction crew for a house, we're doing a lot of the architecture work, including showing those blueprints to the people who are going to live in the house. And then we're using that to constantly iterate and make sure the construction crew are actually building things that we're not going to have to uproot later. They're like building the right things and spending resources on, building the you know, building the right thing before we worry about building the thing right, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm. One of the goals or efforts that I have this year for the Service Guild is to um, work on understanding our users and who we're serving and what their needs are and um, how to speak to them, how to market so that we're actually reaching more people. And I wonder what kinds of things from your experience with these things you would mention or recommend, or like things that you see a lot of people miss, or anything in that direction.
The first thing that comes to mind is like specificity. When people talk about like their target audience for an initiative, they're often like, um, "Oh, we're going to reach stressed people." And you're like, "Okay." So like, I would say like as an experiment, like come up with a two-pager on like everything from what are the pain points they're dealing with to like what attitudes do they have, like what values do they have, what's their experience level with technology, what's their experience level with meditation, what kinds of things, like what does the word service mean to them, like trying to get really specific about who would be the target audience. One of the things that stops people from doing this is in order to start an initiative, they want to serve everyone. They want this to be big. So they're like, if the more we narrow, the less big a group we're talking about. But the metaphor I like to use for this is like a dartboard, where if you design for the center of the bullseye, you'll end up catching darts on the whole board. But trying to design for the whole board is very difficult, right? So get that key target audience, that bullseye target audience clarified. And then the next step I'd say is like as early as possible, recruit people who fit that criteria who you don't know personally and show them what you're working on in various capacities and do it in a way where you're not like, hey, I'm the founder of this thing. Can you look at my baby? And they're like, your baby's so cute, even if it's not. You got to get like either you pretend to be an independent or you get an independent researcher or something where you show up and you're like, hey, I'm just an independent researcher. Like legit, what do you really think about this offering? And you're doing it right if they start ripping it apart because it's hard to hear, but that's the kind of feedback you need to make something great.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, and maybe one other, because you also mentioned like what you would typically call marketing and getting it out there, right? There's a big, I would say, like I work with a lot of startups, nonprofits, and institutions. Like we have one public company, but mostly we're working with like new things, new features, new ideas that are coming into the world. And there's a lot of knowledge out there about corporate marketing that is not necessarily relevant to like a scrappy, small, young team trying to get something out there. A great classic example of this is like you can go to a marketing agency and you can pay them $30,000 and they'll give you like a slide deck, which is just like, here's your logo and your colors and fonts and like here's some deep aspirational emotional values. And like when you're trying to rebrand like Coca-Cola, like I get it, that's where all that stuff comes from, like Don Draper, like pitching the big corporate or whatever. In a startup, it's more like, first of all, your number one obstacle, like what I've seen, is people will be like, is this the right logo? Is this the right color? Is it beautiful? Like the number one obstacle is comprehension,
Mm,
which is like if someone looks at your like web page for 15 seconds and then we close it on them, can they
mm,
tell you what the Service Guild is?
mm,
If they can't, that's your number one problem, right? It's
mm,
like, and so people in startups will often spin out into all these like, we just need a better logo. And I'm
mhm,
like, I'm always like, do you think people understand what this is? Because if they don't, they're gone, right? There's
mm,
no one's paying or emailing or signing up for something they don't understand. And so, like, I would say like four times out of five, that actually is the thing that moves the needle the most at a very early stage for a new initiative. From there, then we start to kind of learn, okay, well, like, is it looking professional enough? Or what are some of the specific pieces of information or values that are missing from this that are helping people understand? And then there's like the voodoo of like trying to imagine what will actually connect with people and finding that quid pro quo, like something we can give in return for that, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But comprehension is like the foundation.
mm, mm, mm. Love that. Those are all really helpful frames. Very timely.
Oh, great.
Can you tell me about some experiences you've had through your career, maybe early on, where you learned those lessons yourself?
Yeah. Um, So I was kind of in charge of product and design for the Muse headband, right? Which was the brain sensing meditation tool, which I did not expect anyone would know what that is because it was such a crazy product idea. Like I was like, this is a cool project, but like probably not going to go anywhere because it's absolutely wild. But I'm really proud of the team and what we put together because it actually managed to like have a positive impact on many lives. But one of the things that's interesting about that is like the comprehension problem was massive,
Mm,
right? And when I joined the team, I was the first sort of like kind of UX design product type thinker. One of the founders, Trevor, who's still a good friend, was sort of like the founder who was taking the product lead role. And when we first met, he knew what he knew his to his credit, he knew that the organization was missing this kind of thinking, but he didn't have that skill set. So we were like a match made. We immediately were like, we need to work together on this. And you know, when I joined, I remember one of the first things I saw was some of the photography of the product. And it had people kind of wearing the like headband. I don't know if you can picture it in your head, but it's like this
mm,
like plastic brain sensor headband.
mm,
And it's like someone was like wearing it walking down the street, and someone was like wearing it in a coffee shop or something. And I was like, we're this is very confusing. Like, why would someone wear this while they're walking down the street? Like, there's nothing about this picture that suggests what the use case is, and it's also kind of socially awkward. We're asking people to like think this is normal and think this is okay. Like, and so we started to do some research with our target audience, which at the time were like stressed professionals, and we had a whole profile. Um, And like we understood a lot about all the confusion. Like a bunch of people saw those pictures and thought they were just headphones. And they're like, it's weird. These headphones you just wear on the front. And I was started to convince the organization, like, it's really cool what we're building here, but it's not going to matter if people don't understand what it is. And so I started to like put together photography guidelines, like this should always be worn along with a pair of headphones to disambiguate it. And it should always be in a private place, like a bedroom or an office, so people don't feel the social pressure. We should also have a phone in the picture so people can see that there's like an app and there's something going on there. And that they should have eyes closed and be meditating so people can see that this is like a meditation tool. And then you have a simple message along with it. The photo actually tells a story of what it is. Now, our marketing team at the time obviously pointed out these are not going to be nearly as sexy photos. And it's a perfect example of my earlier point, right? The value of comprehension. And that happened on our website where the team actually commissioned an agency, you know, many dollars to build a very fancy, beautiful website with all this beautiful animation. And when I did this kind of like human-centered design research on it with our target audience, again, they weren't using those guidelines and they had people had no idea what the product was. And I was like, listen, this is a brain sensor that allows someone to self-administer neurofeedback while engaging in mindfulness meditation. Like it is not obvious what this is.
mm,
Also, it's really cool. And I don't think we need to kind of dress up the message more than just say what it is because it's really cool. And so I got, I think, 1/6 the budget that they spent on that website to build a challenger website.
Hmm.
And I used WordPress and my basic design team to prop up a way uglier site. But it actually was just way more matter of fact. It had the kind of photography I was talking about. And it was like, Muse is a brain sensing headband that helps you meditate and gives you real time feedback. Like I just said, this is what this thing is. And we had a 2x conversion rate on the beautiful website.
Hmm.
And then we switched over to them. And then we did another research round and we tweaked it over more and we doubled the conversion rate again. And so we ended up with a 4x conversion rate of people actually being interested in buying this product with a way uglier website. Like it was a WordPress template default compared to this beautiful custom thing just because we told the story. And now if you go to the Muse website, it's both because they've gotten it all beautiful and everything like that. But that was like a foundational example of like at an early stage, if you can have aesthetics or comprehension, what's more important?
Hmm. Hmm. I can guess from context, but can you say in your own terms what a challenger website is?
So it's basically like we have something up and running. So we are going to build something smaller to see if we can perform better with a different way of thinking. So this thing, we've already invested a lot of money. It's out there. People are seeing it. We're going to take a little bit and say, if can we like in a smaller amount of budget, create something that actually challenges some of our assumptions about the large one. And so in this example, we challenged the assumption that the aesthetics were more important than the comprehension and basically proved to the whole team that a website is not a billboard. It's not about being beautiful with aspirational, simple language. It's about explaining what this is.
What do you feel like are your current growth edges with your work personally?
It's the book for sure.
Hmm.
Like it's a whole new world for me. And I also am like, we have a with Still Ape, we have a kind of ebb and flow. Like there are periods like we're going into a busy period now, the number of projects going. And then there's also periods where there's like not much happening. And as an entrepreneur, like when if you've got like if you're working for some company, some organization, the busy times are stressful. And then the calm times you're like, okay, I can get a breather. When you're an entrepreneur, it's like the busy times are stressful. And then the slow times are stressful too because you're like, is everything about to fall apart? Were those my last projects ever? And now we're never going to get another project again. And
Hmm.
like, is my team going to go leave and work somewhere else because they're not getting enough work from me? And so one of the growth edges is learning to kind of like take the break and have that trust and faith that I will put my authentic self up there and continue to be mission driven on mindfulness and somehow the universe will provide enough to take care of my son, like just keep that faith going forward. And then I'd say the other edge right now is like um because of that ebb and flow, I can get into a pattern of like doing everything myself. And I've been burned in the past trying to delegate a little bit and like I've gotten some good advice around that, but like because things are getting busy again, I want to kind of start to delegate a bit more. And I don't think I'm very good at that, honestly. I
Hmm.
just don't think I'm very good at like, I'm good at working with people who have complementary skill sets and letting them do their work and express their genius and me express my genius and we work together. But to take things that I think I'm actually pretty good at, but get support on them so I can kind of like oversee more of it, like the typical, I guess what they say in corporate, I've never really had a big corporate job, but like management type stuff it makes me a little nauseous and I'm not good at it. And I feel like I probably could have a better positive impact on the world if I got good at it. But I
Hmm.
have all kinds of challenges with it. And I'm going to be trying again coming up with one of my team members. And I hope it goes well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Shifting gears again, I'd love to talk about your relationship with your son and being a father and um, yeah, just open-ended. I'd love to hear how you approach that and what kind of father you'd like to be.
Yeah. It's a complicated and edgy issue for me. So my son is neurodivergent, has like diagnoses and all that sort of stuff. And like I said earlier, this twice exceptionality is a real doozy because like there's so much going on in his mind that it allows him to do incredible things, but it's almost like too much for him to even handle. Like he's asking questions bigger than he has the emotional maturity to handle. He is so immediately bored when there isn't like incredibly complicated things to chew on, to the point that as a coping mechanism, he just creates incredibly complex imaginary worlds to fill the space in idle moments. And so he requires like constant supervision, which is exhausting. But I love him dearly, and he's hilarious and has incredible energy and brings so much to our lives. And so it's a roller coaster, man. It's like, you go from like just these incredible days of like, being the father you want to be, which is empathic, caring, in touch with emotion, but able to set boundaries and able to drive like, potential and learning and that sort of thing. And then also these other days where you're just exhausted and you just want to give up and you just want to break and you're just like run to the edge of your routine. And like, my wife and I end up having a lot less time for each other as a result of this. And I would say a big source of the challenge. I'll give you a big source of the joy and a big source of the challenge. So a big source of the joy is because he has a very active and sharp mind at very young ages. I was able to like teach him chess and like coding, and he's like playing and building and just able to have these like incredible conversations. Like he asks these questions. There's one time I think I tweeted it where he was really into Kirby. You know the Kirby games, the franchise, little pink guy. Yeah. So he's still into Kirby, but he loves Kirby. And so he kind of like around the age of 4, he saw like he was like, what is that word? And he was pointing to the Nintendo logo. So I explained to him like, oh, Nintendo's a company, like because he knows Daddy has a company. So he's like, it's like a company. It's like much bigger than my company. It's like a big company with like hundreds and thousands of people, and they make video games, and they made Kirby. And he was like, they made Kirby? And I was like, yeah, they drew him and they programmed him and they coded him and they made this game. And he was like, wow. And he went back to playing. But like you've met Ollie, so he's processing, right? At dinner that night, he's having dinner and he was like, Daddy, he's 4. He's like, Daddy, you know how Nintendo made Kirby? I was like, yeah. He's like, who made the world? I was like, okay, parenting moment. You got to be online. You got to do this right. This is a formative ego building, self building, world building moment. So he's always asking big questions, and so
Wait,
that's
how
it's
did
just
you answer that? I
oh
want to
yeah,
know. Who
okay,
made
yeah,
the
no,
world,
no,
Jay?
yeah. So I said, um, I won't get it exactly, but I basically pitched it as like a lot of people have different beliefs about that. And I was like, some people believe that there is like some sort of being, which they call God, that created everything for us. Other people believe that it was like nature, like things grew and evolved and learned and changed over time. And I ended up later drawing them like a diagram of evolution. And then I was like, some people like just admit that they don't know, and they just like think it's kind of a mystery, and it's kind of like magic. And I asked him like, "What do you think?" And he was like, "I think there's a God." That's what he said. And but then later he really got into evolution, and I explained to him. So he's kind of like flip-flopping or whatever. But
Hmm.
even before he was born, I had a plan when he was a little older and ready for it that I would take him to all different places of worship. Like I would take him to a mosque and a temple and a Buddhist monastery and a church and all these things. And so now I feel even more like called to do that when he's a bit older. But yeah, we've had ongoing conversations. In fact, once some Christian monasteries or missionaries came to the door, and I invited them in, and we had a whole conversation with my son with them. And they were a little bit not okay with the way I feel like they were. I was trying to be compassionate or whatever, but I was also trying, like, I was like, my son is actually really interested in spirituality. So I explained to him, like, these are people that believe in God, right? Like they're called Christians, and they believe in God. Do you have any questions for them? And he started asking them all these questions, and he was like, asking about evolution and stuff like that. And honestly, I was hoping they would be more open to the interaction, but they were kind of just weirded
Wow.
out and sort of
Wow.
left. But I was happy with how it went. I hope they didn't feel too weirded out, but
Uh,
I'm sure they get doors slammed in their face a lot. So at least we dialogued.
uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, anyway, so that's like the joy. The big challenge has been because of his twice exceptionality. Um, it's very difficult to get kind of him in any situation other than at home with mom and dad. So
Mm,
from being kicked out of preschools to have babysitters quit to like leaving him with grandparents and then coming back to just a huge catastrophic meltdown and fight to like making the decision that like we have to be very selective about who the caregivers are to like having one babysitter we trust like and then she has to move away because she's done school, and like back to just us being full-time all the time caregivers. And now he's in his second year of kindergarten. It's been a very tough, lots of really big fights in the morning to go to school, lots of incidents at school, a few times having to pick him up early. He refuses to take the bus. So now we're driving him every day. He doesn't do the full day of school. And then I feel for him because he's in the school environment and it's just not designed for a brain like his. Like he's sensitive and it's so loud and he needs structure and there's so much unstructured time.
mm,
And I'm just like, we're just wrestling constantly with like, how do we find like there's not really a lot of other alternatives around here. And do we have to move to find like the right specialized school? Do we homeschool, which is even more effort on our
mm,
end? And then there's like the just exhaustion, like the tax it pays on our mental health and physical health, as well as our relationship to never really have the downtime. And like we really burned out last summer. And then I like took on this aggressive project to get as much care as possible. Like, so this year we have like specialists coming once a week and we have like people coming in really just to give us a break, honestly. And it's really hard to, it's been really, really challenging, both in the sense of like not having any downtime for ourselves, but also thinking about where we're going to send this kid and like, is school even going to work? And like, how are we going to do that? So, and, given the fact that he's so brilliant, it's like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do? So that's a constant struggle. And yeah, part of that is the mixed bag of you wake up and it could be an easy day, or it could be 3 hours of fighting until we get him to school, or maybe he just refuses to go. And then we're with him all day again, and I have to work. So my wife is there, anyway, I could go on,
mhm,
but that's the struggle.
mm. What virtues do you feel like you've cultivated through being a parent so far?
What was the word you said? What?
What virtues do you feel like you've cultivated so far?
Patience. I've relied heavily on my practice, especially being okay with discomfort and uncertainty. Um, I think it's opened up a lot of care for me too. It's like, it's been a journey as a someone raised masculine, like tapping into emotions has been a journey my whole life. And even more so, like opening up in that way. I think with my wife and I too, we've like really skilled up at our communication with each other because we have such tiny little moments to either connect or communicate or to like make a plan. So we've really skilled up in like the efficiency of our connection, but also our ability to like, when we do have a night off to really like relax and unwind. I think there's a ton of gratitude as well too. Like there's so much there's so much clarity that like this is the climax of my life right now. Like I'm gonna look back forever at these years when Oliver was a kid and that we were just so slammed back to front. And I think um, I don't know if it's the practice or some combination of doing this when I'm a bit older, but like very cognizant of the fact of the big picture there. And it's a permanent support for me to rely on when the going gets tough to remember that, like, as tough as today was, there's going to be a day where all I want is to hang out with 6-year-old Oliver again because he's now 17 and he's like, fuck you, dad. Guitars are stupid, or whatever he'll say when he's a teenager, right?
Mm,
But it's like, a good example of that is like, we'll have this like long, exhausting day. And let's say we're having a struggle with bedtime, trying to get him to bed. And we'll be like, take turns and we'll get him to bed and he'll fall asleep or whatever. And then we'll like finally plop down, like Chris and I, and we'll be hanging out. And I'll always make this joke. We'll be like, this is boring. Should we wake him up?
uh-huh,
Because it's like it so seems so hard in the moment. And then the moment he goes to bed, I miss him. And you're just
uh-huh,
like, that's like a very
uh-huh.
difficult, it's a very exemplary of the larger perspective of what it feels like at this time.
Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Such a sweet kid. They can send him the love in this moment. So, uh, mm. Well, we've covered a lot of territory, and you've very kindly answered questions about all kinds of things. Is there anything that you'd like to talk more about or dive more deeply into?
Ooh, I think we've covered a lot of it. I mean, we've gone through all the identities, but
Mhm.
um, I mean, I have questions for you.
Hit me.
So I do have the unique um, memory of your lay ordination,
Mm-hmm.
where you got the name Tasshin. I was in that room with you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm curious as to how that Tasshin is different from this one. Like what?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a very interesting moment, and we were strangers then, and we had just kind of
Mm-hmm.
met.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of where we were, in terms of like in the world, like that center that we were at in Maple and like what you're doing now, like I'm curious as to like what the evolution has been like in terms of your being
Mm-hmm.
and your practice and from that day to this day.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking that question. Well, first off, I think we must have met before 2018. I think you came to visit Johnson when Maple was at
Yes,
Johnson, and that's when we would
correct.
have met. So,
That's where we first met.
um,
You're right. You're
yeah.
right.
Um, anyway, I remember smiling earlier in this conversation when you were talking about having met me at that period because and like like sort of watching the journey because my subjective experience is that the person who you would have met in whatever year and certainly in 2018 is like pretty qualitatively different than the person that you're speaking to now. I wrote this piece called The Day I Was Born, and it's about an experience I had with MDMA in 2021. And I kind of, it's a metaphor, of course, but like described it as the day that I was born as this person rather than, my literal birth, which was in 1991. But yeah, and of course, from another perspective, it's continuous and there's similarities and whatever. But I think there was sort of a phase shift that happened around then, and certainly that day in 2021. But also just leaving Maple for the second time, and um, I think that I don't know the words that are coming up feel incomplete and sort of inaccurate, but I'll have to go with them anyway. That I think that that person that you would have met originally was pretty neurotic and uptight and like very black and white thinking like things are good or bad and I should do the good thing and not the bad thing and there's a right way to do things and a wrong
Mm,
way and um just very stressed and in my head and uh the reason that those things don't feel quite accurate is because I can see those tendencies of mine still present. I'm still can be neurotic or, obsessed with things or maybe not so much the right and wrong, but, anxious about things or all of that. But there was kind of a phase shift of feeling like I had access to something bigger. And there's a question I'm super curious about right now that I've been interested in for the last couple of years of like the way that it occurs to me is like what makes me feel like myself or not like myself. And
mm,
when I feel like myself, that just feels like a resonant way to put it. But when I feel like myself, I have a larger sense of optimism and hope and motivation and self-confidence and clarity and direction of like, oh, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing, this is what I'm going, and just day after day, like what's the next step? What's the next step? And when I don't feel like myself, yeah, I feel like echoes of that younger Tasha and Michael person of sort of a small mind and sort of anxious and um, either really liking or disliking experience and kind of being averse to things and trying to get things to be a certain way. And um, when I feel more broadly connected. There's an optimism and a hope and a clarity and a courage. And a lot of I try to write actually my tweets from that perspective, at least a lot of them, of like when I'm really in that, put in a really rhetorically strong way, like as strong as I possibly can, this kind of intensity of hope or optimism or love or kindness or curiosity, and really so that I can kind of refer back to that. Oh, this is how you think when you are in that, and it's sort of aspirational of rising to that. Can I more and more embody those qualities in my life? And because my life is better when I'm in that versus this sort of like small, tight, constricted mind. And that larger view can hold all kinds of challenges and difficulties. Because even the challenges and difficulties, it's like, oh, this is a learning opportunity. I'm growing through this. I'm cultivating virtues. I'm learning new skills. I'm learning to help other people better. Like even a difficult moment is from that perspective, like, oh, great, I'm going to grow. Like, yeah, this is hard. It's still hard, but I can kind of have an optimism about it and see the larger picture. And I hope that I have more and more access to that over the years, that I can I think those seeds are there. And yeah, I just don't think I had much access to that then at that time.
Hmm. I love that answer. I think the words are really interesting because you're
Mm.
pointing to that. Yeah, I don't know. And I don't even want to add more words to it, but you're pointing to
I
something.
almost wince when people refer to that past person. Like someone told me recently who I they that they met me at that time, and I like apparently got angry at them about they told me what I got. I was like, I have no memory of this, but that definitely tracks. Like that guy was so uptight about so many things and like kind of tense and just like, I gotta do it the right way. And like it sucked to be that person. I'm sure it sucked to be around him. And
Yeah, I mean, for me, like befriending that younger Jay, like kind of
yeah.
reparenting him has been really interesting. Like in terms of his craving for attention and like his desire to express himself and like because as I mentioned, there was a period where I like holed up and was like afraid to play my guitar, afraid to put
Mm,
myself out in the world in any way because of all the wounds around it. And now I'm like, there are times where I know I need that younger Jay. Like when I put that video of myself playing music up that I mentioned, like I needed to tap into like an irreverent, and
mm,
this is why I'm interested in identities because like I want to bring like part of that authentic self that I step into, like you were talking about, is kind of mischievous. And I feel
yeah.
like I've like pushed him down and he
Mm,
like only shows up in my group chat with like my university friends, like he's like I'm like
uh,
so I really resonate with that. And also, I read Maple Seeds, which you wrote,
mm,
and I recently read The Path of Love,
hmm.
and there's a very big difference in the tone of those two.
That's so true. It's so
But
funny.
like,
Yeah.
there's a part that when I read The Path of Love, there was a part that I don't know if you feel this way, I'm going to say it,
Mm,
that recognized that like you couldn't have written that without maple seeds.
mm,
And that was like a kind of beautiful like before and
mm,
after. And maybe now that I'm realizing it, maybe the origin of this question, why it was burning, is that like because like books are such wonderful access into someone's state of mind, which is
mm,
kind of why I love books. And so like it was really interesting to kind of read The Path of Love recently and like
uh-huh.
just recognize like the vulnerability, the letting go of the need to make sense was a big part of like, whoa. And then also, of course, the focus on love and meta and like
Mm,
all of that we woven together was just absolutely beautiful. And I could see the contrast effect to put it in
mm,
psychological terms. And it was really wonderful. But yeah, I think that trying to stay more with that authentic, whatever it is yeah, I think this is probably the source of our connection is that
mm,
even then and now, because I was a different guy then too,
mm,
I think I've perceived in you always that same thirst to stay with that, whatever it is. And I think, part of that is not thirsting for it, which is a whole other conversation. But
mhm,
I think that's like some of the foundation of our connection, which is so wonderful. And
mm,
like you sending meta to my son is like the best. It's like the
mm.
best. It's like the best thing you could say.
No, can't help myself. I've been sending him metta for a long time, and your wife,
Yeah.
and yeah, and you, of course. Um, I love those reflections. Thank you. They're so sweet. And for people who don't know, Maple Seeds is a book I worked on with Soryu, my teacher, and sort of presenting his teachings in a in an accessible way. And um, I really appreciate that reflection, especially because I have this really strong memory of exactly what you say of writing that book where the last thing that I wrote for that was the posture section at the end, which I had such trouble with because in one way because posture has never been my strength as a meditator. You know, I'm a computer guy, so uh, anyway, and I had to like take these pictures of me sitting in the good posture, and I was like, oh, this is not how I normally sit. You know, I do really more like anyway. We also took bad picture postures, like, oh yeah, this is how. Anyway, I mean, it was exaggerated, um,
Yeah.
but I remember when I wrote that passage, it was like the one of the last things we worked on, if not the last thing. There's a paragraph or two or three or four at the beginning of that where I emailed it to Soryu or sent it to him or whatever, and he called me on the phone like 5 minutes later, and he was in his little cabin,
Yeah.
a half mile away, not that far away, but he called me and he was so excited and he was like trying to I wish I could remember the words he used, but he was like, this is it. This is it. I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, this, the way you wrote this, you were relaxed when you wrote this. And like, this is good. Do more of this. And I was like, okay, because my assignment at the time had been relax. And he was like, the way you're writing this is from that relaxed place. And I remember it was so easy to write that passage where I was like, oh, I'll just almost just say what needs to be said and nothing more and nothing less. And even though that wasn't a particularly exciting passage, I think because he called me, it kind of bookmarked in my body mind, oh, this is how writing is, it's possible to write this way. And that's how I tweet now, and that's how I write other things. And, I write novels now. That's how I write novels. It's like
Mhm.
from that place of relaxation and just letting it come through. And I understand. And at the time, I was confused. Like, what? I thought he was going to yell at me, like, "Oh, this isn't very good" or something. But he was very excited. He was like, "This is good." Like, do more of this. And I understand now why he got so excited about that because, yeah, the glimmers of this other person were coming through instead of the like tight like
That's
person.
amazing. And it's like, yeah, it actually speaks to the role of a great teacher as well,
Yeah,
right? It's like that pointing out. Like it's like
yeah,
he didn't do anything in that moment other than point out something that you did.
yes,
And that's what stuck with you is this memory of that place, which is so wonderful. And I
hmm
also like love the idea that like you hear the phone ring and you're 95% sure that he's going to be like, that's not how you really sit,
yeah,
because like you've got your stories about like what
totally.
you've written and what you've created, right? Which is so what we've been talking about for these entire 2 hours. Like, right? It's like
Uh-huh.
you have your stories about creation, and then there just is creation.
Mm,
And
uh,
trying to bridge that gap, it's a life's work, you know.
mm. I'd be curious to ask, I mean, you were just asking how I've changed since that time. And, I could ask you how you've changed since that time, but I think we actually have a sense of it from this conversation. And I'd rather ask instead a question I've loved asking people recently, which is, let's just say for hypothetical purposes that you live another 40 years, okay? It might be 50, might be 60, might be 30, might be a year for all we know. But like, let's say 40. Um, for the purposes of this conversation, what virtues would you hope that you would have cultivated between now and then?
The first thing that comes to mind is what we were just talking about, which is like I am embracing at this stage of life that there is creation.
Mm,
And I still oscillate heavily between I'm a creative person and there is creation.
mm,
And I hope to continue on that journey to come closer and closer to there is creation. And I don't know exactly what that means, but like it's been inspiring to talk it through with you as well, like just to kind of reassert and reaffirm that virtue. And like it connects, I think anyone who's sort of creative will get what I mean by this, but like it actually for me connects to being aware and being compassionate and having self-awareness and insight and taking positive action on the world and everything else that I care about that we can like list out all the virtues. but like fundamentally, all of those things are enabled by my ability to create selflessly for others. And I really struggled with that, as you know, when I was younger. And I'm on my journey to healing those wounds and finding a way. And I really do think that if I can get out of my own way, in a sense, um, that would be the full fruition of like my dharma or like my vow or my purpose or whatever you want to call it. Of like, and I don't know what there is creation of. And yeah, I hope to find out.
Mm, mm, beautiful, beautiful. May it be so. Mm,
Yeah, I think I can leave you with a wonderful image of that that's just coming to mind, which is when I was really struggling in that dark place with my guitar. One of the big unlocks um, was I had like a vision when I was on a retreat. Um, I think at Maple. I
mm,
think. No, 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 no. It was a Vipassana retreat.
mhm,
Anyway, I had a vision, and it was a vision of like my first person perspective looking down at my hands playing guitar,
mhm,
but my hands were like super old and like really like shaky and just like old. And I was trying to like form a G chord. I still remember which chord it was. I was trying to form a G chord on the guitar. And my hands were shaking so much that I couldn't form the chord. And it was like a strange vision, but like it brought me like a ton of feeling. And
mm,
part of it was this like at first, like it was like a two tone feeling. Like the first wave of feeling was this like incredible grief and sadness about like what it would be like to not be able to play music anymore when it's like such an, and I was actively not playing at that time. And I was like, why am I not playing? Like,
mm,
what does it mean to not like create? There is no creation, right? But then the second wave of like incredible euphoric joy and bliss was the realization that the subtext of that image was that I was still trying to play
mm,
at that last moment when I couldn't anymore. That like I actually got to experience what it was like for the very first time to not be able to play because I've actually continued to try to play, to try to create, to try to be, to try to positively impact, to try to share until I really just couldn't anymore. And that became like a guiding light for me for on this particular virtue of just like it's not about putting an album out or getting views or attentions or likes or whatever. I will consider my music career or like, musicianship a success if I'm still trying to do it when I can't anymore. And that was a
mm,
big turning point for me to like pick up again and start to play again.
mm. Ah, that's beautiful. I feel a lot of happiness hearing about that and just knowing from my own experience how much joy listening to music brings and creating music and that you could kind of reconnect back to that of like doing it for its own sake and your own joy rather than some external performative uh, need that yeah is based in a really valid desire for connection and but yeah manifesting in this less healthy way. Yeah.
Yeah, at first it was craving and then it was hiding. And
Mm,
now I'm tapping into that authentic desire for connection as opposed to the craving. But yeah,
mm,
yeah.
mm. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself in this conversation and all different parts of you and different parts of your life. I've learned a lot, and I hope that this will benefit others who listen as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And like you really inspired me to double down on this like identity shift on social. So as soon
Yeah, I
as
want to
we
see it.
as soon as we close the call, I think I'm gonna like bring Mischievous Jay onto X immediately and see what
Let's
happens.
go.
Because I've been waiting for a sign to do it. And I think I'm going to and see what happens.
I want to see your mischief on X, and then also I'm gonna make sure I follow you on LinkedIn. So, because I
Yeah,
love that part too.
and maybe I'm probably going to make an alt that you can't find to share music
Uh-huh.
on TikTok. So
Very
yeah.
good. Until it gets up, it's gonna blow up and be really
Oh yeah,
big, and
right.
everyone will hear, "Hey, you never know. You never
Yeah,
know.
that'd be great.
When you don't try, that's when it'll happen, probably." So,
Yeah, that's exactly right, isn't it?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Well, great
All
to see
right.
you, man. Thank you for this.
Yeah, likewise.